So now we are ready to remove our carburetor. Now that we've taken off our muffler, we've taken off our air filter, and we've taken off our trim panel and all of that good stuff, we are ready to dive in and get that carburetor out, and we'll do some activities with the carburetor in class, not on our carburetors and our engines obviously, but to get started we're going to need to have a ratchet. Again, it's a common theme. We're going to need a socket, and this particular socket is going to be a 10 mil socket. And we're going to need a nut driver, and we're also going to need a flathead screwdriver, and we'll show you how that ties in here in a minute. But before we get started, it's going to be important that, again, we take lots and lots of pictures. So I have my iPhone out here. Okay, you're going to want to take pictures of all of these governor linkages. Okay, so all of these little wires that we see up here, that's all called governor linkages, and you'll learn a little bit more about that in class, but we're going to want to make sure those pictures are all taken so that when you put your engine back together, you know where all those linkages go and your engine starts correctly. So take plenty of pictures from different angles and whatnot, just so you have them. Make sure that multiple people in your group have pictures in case like you happen to drop your phone in a lake or something, you have backup, okay? So before we get started with taking off the actual carburetor, we first need to remove those linkages. So it's a little bit hard to see from this angle, but what you're going to need for this is that flathead screwdriver. And we have this long, thicker metal linkage that we have. What you're going to do is you're going to press the flathead screwdriver against the black bracket that's there. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about once you get in the shop. And you're going to press the screwdriver against that black bracket, and you're going to calmly remove the metal sprocket out with your right hand. So you're going to have your left hand against the screwdriver, pushing against that bracket, and your right hand is going to be pushing this metal sprocket, if you will, or linkage out, okay? So then you're going to have it a little bit loosey-goosey, okay? Then you're going to have a much thinner linkage, okay? This much thinner linkage is very fragile and very easy to break. So you need to be very careful when you're removing it, okay? So basically you're going to go on in there and very patiently fish it out, okay? Try to avoid bending it if you can, okay? Then you're going to remove that. Once you've done that, it's time to remove your air filter base. So what you're going to do is you're going to grab your ratchet again, and you are going to grab a 10 mil. So you've removed your linkages. Now it's time to remove your air filter base so we can get at that carburetor much easier. What you're going to want to do again is grab that ratchet and then your 10 mil socket, and you're going to go up again, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, and remove. Okay. Once it gets short enough or easy enough to pull out, you can remove your socket, put it on your nut driver like so, and then kind of go in there and pop them out. Pretty easy. Okay. There's one. There's the other one. Okay. So we're going to want to get a Ziploc bag. I'm going to call these air filter base. Okay. Place those inside of the baggie so you know exactly where they go and zip it shut. Okay. Then what you're going to want to do is very, very calmly and patiently remove your air filter base. Okay. So now that you've removed the nuts from your air filter base, it's now time to remove the entire air filter base, and then we can get at the carburetor a little bit easier. So up here we have our choke, as we'll call it. Okay, you're going to need to be very strategic and hold this out very carefully. You're going to have to call me over for a demo on this probably, but what you're going to do is just kind of wiggle that choke out. Okay, once it's out, it's going to be pretty easy for your air filter base to be removed, okay? So it's going to look like this. It's going to be flailing right now because all that's connecting it is this hose here, and then you'll just very carefully remove the hose fitting like that. Okay, so this is your air filter base. Set that aside. And then right here we have our carburetor, okay? So you're gonna need to use a ratchet at first to start to remove, you're gonna have a torque socket as well, okay? So you're gonna start removing it with a ratchet. And once it gets loose enough again, kind of getting the trend here, you're gonna switch over to your nut driver because that's gonna make it a little bit easier on you to remove, okay? Maybe. There we go, okay. Plop that on there and have at her. So very calmly remove these screws. You'll notice that there is a gasket, okay? You're gonna wanna make sure that, just like with all of our screws and components, all of this goes in a Ziploc baggie, okay? We wanna make sure that everything remains intact and good for the next semester class that's going to be taking apart these engines too. Okay. So from here, the carburetor is going to be pretty easy to remove. Okay, so we have one out. Here's the other. Okay, so I have my carburetor bag right here. I'm just going to start putting stuff in there just so it's all present and accounted for. So again, the gasket is going in there along with what we just removed, okay? And then you're gonna be able to kind of start to get the carburetor out from there. We've successfully removed our air filter base. Now it's time to actually remove our carburetor, okay? So one thing that we're gonna notice here is that there's two carburetor studs that we're gonna be working on removing, and then we have our nice little gasket, okay? So we wanna make sure that we take a picture of the location of these studs and the gasket like so, just so we remember that the gasket goes on this side of the carburetor, okay, and what it looks like on there. So what you're gonna need to do is you're gonna need to take out your studs very carefully. Okay. And you'll notice that the carburetor just kind of starts to come out with it. Okay. So here's your two studs and your gasket, and here's your carburetor. If I were you, what I would do is place these into a Ziploc bag once again, just so everything is together, and label it carburetor or carburetor components, so you have everything all together. One quick thing here that I would like to mention before we wrap up is obviously we just ran our engines not too long ago, so there might be some leftover gas in this carburetor. After all, because the carburetor provides the rich air-fuel mixture, so we need to make sure that there's no gasoline or fuel just hanging out in here. So maybe call me over if you're a little bit unsure on this, but grab a paper towel and maybe double check just to make sure there's no gasoline, fuel, or anything leaking around in there. And when you're done, then you can put your carburetor into the carburetor bag. And that should be the end of this module. So basically here today, folks, we removed our linkages going to our carburetor, removed our air filter base, and then we were able to get into our carburetor. So next up, we're going to start working on our governor system, and then we're going to go in and learn a little bit more about compression and ignition systems. So there you have it.